All right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us here to the Failsafe way to migrate to HubSpot Enterprise webinar. I'm Ben from No Bounds Digital. I am joined by our co-host, Todd Earwood of Integrate IQ. We've got, I think, an action-packed better part of an hour here for you. If you're thinking about making a move to HubSpot Enterprise, it's a big decision. It's an inflection point for your business. It's an important decision, and I think it's something that is ultimately going to benefit you. But why not start that whole process on the right foot? Goodness knows when we get the migration right, that's going to improve adoption among our users. That's going to set us up for success using the HubSpot platform. But before I get too far onto my high horse, I wanted to go into the overarching agenda here, which is introductions, hear a little bit about Todd and myself, why HubSpot Enterprise, if this is just something that you're still investigating, haven't quite drunk the HubSpot Kool-Aid yet, we'll give you some good reasons to do so. How do you prepare for a migration? Because we can get ready to execute on a migration in a way that's going to set us up for success when we actually do the migration itself. You're going to get some best practices, tips and tricks, ways to make sure that the actual migration process itself runs super smooth, or at least as smooth as we can possibly make it. And then we will wrap up with giving you a resource here so that if you weren't feverishly taking notes in the webinar, that you have the information that you need consolidated into a document to help you get on the right track. Todd, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you want to introduce yourself here to the individuals on this webinar, we'd love to hear it.
Thanks, Ben. As Ben said, my name is Todd Earwood, and I'm the founder of Integrate IQ. As you can see plastered behind me. So Integrate IQ is a HubSpot partner, and we are dedicated solely, as our name says, to building integrations. We actually came out of the space of building marketing software. We sold a piece of software to HubSpot when they were a little baby company, and have been awesome to see how they've grown. And one of the things about them is they've grown into this massive platform, which we're going to talk about today. On the enterprise side, when you get to that level, you can start to leverage parts of being on a platform. And so our job in Integrate IQ is to help people move their data around and sync it and integrate it with the disparate systems, so you get to live inside, in this case, HubSpot, and get the data you need from your other tools inside your organization at your fingertips where you like to work. You don't have to go learn some other system. You can have it where you want it. So that's Integrate IQ, and I'm excited, Ben, to be talking about enterprise.
100%. Thanks, Todd. I'm Ben Donahauer. I've been working inside of HubSpot for, maybe 8 years ago. That makes me an old man in HubSpot years. I had hair then, I swear. No, I did not. But we are a platinum HubSpot partner. We have worked with companies, small and large, working with enterprise migrations, working with other enterprise customers, and sort of understood coming into this webinar that there are unique needs and considerations that medium-sized businesses, venture-funded businesses, other sort of among our bread and butter didn't really need to consider or think about. So that was really the impetus for this webinar, is understanding twofold. One is there's some unique needs in enterprise, and two, that HubSpot's enterprise tool set has really grown and matured in the last couple of years. And there are a lot more large companies considering HubSpot now that HubSpot wouldn't have checked the boxes not all that long ago. But now it's meeting your requirements across your organization in sales, marketing, and services tools. So as I'm alluding to, HubSpot Enterprise is a great platform and is something that if you haven't made that decision, hopefully this gives you some considerations to think about. One is HubSpot in its background and where their thought leadership is where their platform is. So HubSpot has revolutionized and become the primary thought leader in inbound marketing, has rethought the marketing and sales funnel to the flywheel so that we're thinking about how not just how do we get sales and marketing alignment, but how do we get alignment across your entire organization so that you're providing an outstanding experience across the board and interdepartmentally. The other big thing that I think a lot of enterprises look at this and almost do a double take is the speed at which we can get you up and running inside of a HubSpot instance. And are you going to have all the little tiny bells and whistles that you want to have tweaked and customized to your needs within 6 weeks? Maybe not. But boy, can I get your users in there doing day-to-day activities inside of HubSpot and actually able to use the tool in very short order compared to a lot of the other options that are out there? 100%. So this is a data point that HubSpot has released about comparing its feature set to other marketing automation platforms. We can get you up and running way, way faster using these tools, and time is money. I mean, honestly, we have a customer who has moved, chose a different tool for their sales tools, and literally it's been 4 quarters and they're still working off of spreadsheets because they're using another tool for their sales side of the house. But I say that's probably on the more troubling side of things, but HubSpot just has this opportunity to get you up and going quicker, faster, start showing results faster, so people aren't working off their Moleskine notebooks and instead working inside of a tool that's working for you.
Ben, I got a funny story here. Much like you talked about the unfortunate route the customer took that took 4 quarters of still waiting. We talked to a company that's a very large company, actually. They have 800 locations across the U.S. And we're talking to the CTO, and he said, okay, is this a 9, 12, or 18-month onboarding process? And I said, no, again, Ben, I think you're right, where HubSpot in the last couple of years has entered that enterprise level where it does have the platform that people are now looking at it. And I said, no, I understand why you would ask that, but there's a different path here, and getting you up and running kind of V1, phase 1 it's weeks, not months. Mm-hmm. And I just know you understand, I was like, dude, I promise you. And so he was almost shocked to a negative degree that we had to go to the rollout plan. So I think it's common that people have, if you've had that painful experience with the rip and replace method of other software systems, it's pretty much the opposite when you get in HubSpot.
Yeah. Great points there. Just something to consider here in terms of being up and running faster. I did get pinged here from someone on my team that they are hearing an echo, Todd, when you speak. So just might want to check that out in terms of your audio. So I'm going to move on to the next slide here when we think about implementation method. This is something else that's unfortunate for those on the agency side of the house. Darn it. There are at least components of this project you can absolutely do on your own in-house if you're so inclined. Somebody super industrious can take this on themselves. Certainly, I think you're going to take a shortcut or two by finding an agency partner who's been there and done this, and this isn't their first rodeo. But and I think this maybe goes back to the implementation time and the implementation method are because HubSpot even though they have robust enterprise tools and a robust enterprise platform, they sort of come from this world of scrappy small business 14 years ago when they started. And so everything is built with that user experience in mind. Everything is built with the thought that, boy, we want to make this as simple as possible for someone to implement, while at the same time they've layered on these robust tools with that same sort of ethos there. So know that not only can you get this up and running relatively quickly, this is something that, depending upon your actual implementation and migration and setup, that there are at least components of this project that you can take on in-house just to make this process as efficient with your dollars and resources as possible. All right. So how do we, now that I gave you the 5-minute commercial of HubSpot, if you weren't already bought in, if you were, you should be feeling pumped now because you made the right move. And if not, I hope you give you some food for thought as you consider the appropriate enterprise platform for you. But now that we're getting into sort of the meat and potatoes of our webinar here, talking about how we can prepare. And this is something that Todd and I have had a number of conversations about, because really when it comes down to a migration, we're talking about first and foremost data, and then second, your processes. And so identifying where your data lives, identifying what data you need, taking a look at all your current systems to see if those are things that are legacy systems that you're going to sunset in your migration to HubSpot, or whether you're looking at integrations with some of your current applications. You just need to get a lay of the land of where you stand with your data, your applications, your content. Todd, any other thoughts on your side here?
Prior to the webinar, Ben, I think this is an inflection point, much like you said in the beginning. Moving to enterprise is an inflection point. The way you take advantage of the inflection point is to start to remember and think back to, okay, what are the cleanup methods? What do I want to discard? So purging, I don't know about you, Ben, but whenever I clean out my house, it's always a positive thing. When you migrate systems or you're upgrading, now is a great time to rethink what's stored in that junk drawer of custom fields. What are the reports that you don't really use anymore that have caused more friction because they pull wasted fields? Typically, this is just a great inflection point to clean up and make your new system even better. I think that's just this unspoken part that people actually get joy out of if they take the chance to clean up a little bit.
Yeah, I think when you look at the project, it's something that might get hard to get started, but once you get into it, it's not only useful, but if you're a Big Bang Theory fan, I remember there was an episode where there was a party going on, and at the end of the group get together, they found Sheldon in the clothes closet here, and he had organized everything in such a way, put things in different boxes, just organized the whole thing. And he said, "This is the best party I have ever been to." And I hope for you that you feel the same way that Sheldon did when you're going through and auditing your current systems and data, when you're taking a look at the content that you have in those legacy systems, and thinking about what you should prune and what you need to bring in, and then thinking about how we can consolidate that. And not just so in our pro tip here, we've got think about how to segment your data before importing it. So I want to consolidate the data, and then once we have something that kind of sort of resembles your precursor to your source of truth, we're going to be able to segment it in different ways as well. So when we have this big picture view of your data, we can do some really solid things to improve your marketing and sales and service processes out of the gate by knowing really what we're dealing with. Right now, you probably have potentially dozens, hundreds of applications here as an enterprise, and HubSpot is one of those tools that could replace dozens of them or augment dozens of them and pull in data from dozens of others so that you do have a sense of a source of truth in your enterprise where maybe you've never had that before. So preparing to sunset our legacy applications and replace them with HubSpot, we want to understand what some of those applications have done, why they were doing those. I'm sure there's pieces of software in your enterprise that no one knows quite exactly what they do, or one person knows exactly what they do. And we need to find those stakeholders, understand who is using what in those applications. And once we do that, once you go through that process in preparing for a migration, you're going to better understand what your requirements are and what your specifications are for a robust HubSpot instance, a robust platform for your enterprise. So that's what I mean by engaging your stakeholders early and understanding what these tools are used for, because what we're going to then be able to gather are the important data points, the important metrics that we need to report on, the content that needs to be moved over into HubSpot, and what we can leave by the wayside just the same. Also is going to be really, really useful for some of the other things that we're going to talk about as part of this webinar, such as training and building out some of the other onboarding components. Todd, you left us and you came back. Glad to see you have returned. With any luck, we've got some decent audio going on your side of the house. What do you think?
Let's hope. We've got the microphone, so I don't know what happened there, but yeah, good to be back.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And
Good.
you sound great.
Awesome.
A little less robotic this time around. We got one of our viewers chiming in.
Yeah,
that
man.
You are good to go.
Thank you, technology.
I unfortunately have to say, isn't it ironic when the tech geeks get the audio visual stuff wrong?
Yeah, no
more
doubt.
often than I would like to say that I have to say that, but it's the nature of the beast. We're HubSpot geeks, not necessarily AV geeks, right?
That's exactly right.
Any other thoughts or feelings here as you kind of came in mid slide on this one, Todd?
Yeah, so I think I'll echo a couple things there, not literally this time, but that's right. I think of it as a consolidation move. When you're choosing a platform and you're going enterprise, now you have an option of rethinking, do I need this? There's certain things you can keep your Instagram story scheduling app if you want, right? There's those kind of things you can keep. But now, and again, when I think about the integration layer here, is like, what are those, and you wrote like legacy on this doc, which I think is really important. Like, what are those applications that you actually don't have to use anymore, that I don't need to use a separate email tool. I don't need to use a separate landing page tool. And that starts to get, the bigger your org, the more apps that you find you don't even know you have, right? But if you start asking your team, it's been shocking how many times when we work through somebody on a migration to enterprise that you go, oh, I didn't even know that Chris was using that tool anymore. I thought we killed that in 2018. Everybody has these ghost apps, and that's okay. But again, now's the chance to stop and say, does it work with HubSpot? Does it replace by HubSpot? And if I need to keep it, what are those touch points where I can make these things talk?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what's a really interesting value proposition for HubSpot here too is, as you say, you have these ghost apps, you have these things that maybe have marginal value to your enterprise.
Yes.
But when you add them all up and you take a look at your actual cost outlay for those tools, it can be significant. at least relative to the cost of HubSpot Enterprise. So if you are a champion for HubSpot and you're trying to build the case there, if you can do a little bit of digging into some of these other applications that HubSpot might be able to replace, I think that would serve you well to making the financial case for migrating to HubSpot. There's a great article on HubSpot's blog by Dan Tyre called Frankenspot or something of that nature. Right. And it just goes into the dozens and dozens of possible tools that you can have and consolidate as part of this migration process for enterprise and for other businesses alike. All right, so talking about identifying applications to integrate through custom or native integration, this is your baby here, Todd. So what should we keep in mind?
Yeah, so after you kind of take inventory, I like to think about this in a 3-step process. Number one, let's go look in HubSpot's marketplace. That way you can start to see what are the connections that are off the shelf. Like every marketplace now, I can see reviews. I can see how many installs there are for popularity's sake. I think it's a great first pass. They're not all free, but we have built lots of integrations for people that have not been in the marketplace. And then we found, like, guess what? You get a lot more business if you can place your app in the marketplace. But I think that's the first thing you got to do is go to HubSpot Marketplace. Second, there is the DIY self-guided connections and syncing tools. HubSpot bought PySync last year. It's still developing. I like to think of depth, right, and breadth and how these integrations work. So Zapier, and Zapier, which, like, of all the brands, Ben, like, I don't know that anybody knows the true definition. I call it Zapier. Other people call it Zapier. But nonetheless, I think every marketer knows that tool. The cool part about that tool is it's very shallow, right? It's very wide. Sort of the breadth is huge. There's thousands and thousands of apps, but a lot of their depth, they will not go a full database to sync your fields. They'll have shallow depth. PySync a little deeper, and there's more tools out there that can do that. The third part is, without being too focused here on myself, but like identifying a partner of like, who can make this if it's not off the shelf? If I can't get a DIY app, where do I need to look for somebody that can help connect different tools? Again, that's our specialty. I will tell you there's obviously more than just us out there. And what you should be looking for here is at least finding a partner who knows one of the two systems. You don't have to know both, right? I like to tell people that in the documentation, typically called API documentation for all these systems, imagine it's written in Mandarin. You need someone that reads Mandarin. You don't need to have someone that actually lives in a Mandarin native speaking country to do it. So if you have, today was a tool that we did a scope for called Job Boss. Never heard of it. Guess what? Our engineers could read the documentation and figure out, but we knew HubSpot. So in this case, find somebody that knows at least one of the two systems. It doesn't have to be both, but if you can identify a partner there, this is kind of the hierarchy of where to start for the, easy, turnkey, do it yourself, and then done for you model.
Yeah. Todd, you're being too modest at point number 3 in the 3-step process. I should say, how Todd and I got connected here was essentially he and the team at Integrate IQ do something that a lot of HubSpot partners just don't have the capability of doing. So once we get into this back-end work, once we get into custom integrations, the API, et cetera, No Bounds Digital, I can design and develop a bang-up website for you. But this work that we're talking about now with the remaining applications, the ones that we can't necessarily sunset as part of the migration process, but are still important to your enterprise, having that resource and skill set is a rare thing, even in a relatively robust partner ecosystem like HubSpot has. So that's how I got to know Todd. We have worked together on several projects and several successful projects. And this was really part of the impetus for this conversation, is because as we ratchet things up to enterprise, we are talking about potentially dozens or hundreds of applications as part of a migration process. So there are going to be pieces of the puzzle in many cases that require custom integration work. And I'm glad you had mentioned about the potential shallowness of Zapier, PieSync, and other similar tools, because it's simple to go to step one and see that there is a integration and say that you've checked that checkbox. I think it's important in this 3-step process to go a little bit deeper on each of those and say, okay, great, I'm glad it has a native integration, but what does that integration really entail? And does it meet my requirements? Because there are a number of clients on my side, and I'm sure your side as well, that there might be a native integration, but they have a particular need with that app that the marketplace just isn't filling.
I think the other thing there to add is you need to also think about depth is key. A lot of people say, like, is Zapier, PieSync. Sure, I need to sync contacts and companies and first name, last name. It's great for that. Email, phone number. But that next level of association to other objects in your database is where you're going to need more help. And then you always have to be mindful of, and this, if you're doing step 2 and you want to design it yourself and the depth is good enough, you've got to think about what happens when what I plan doesn't work. Mm-hmm. What happened when I sync this data and Ben Donahauer already exists in the database? Do I overwrite? Oops, I didn't think about that. That's like another key part about planning out your integration is what happens when the designed sync has a conflict. How are you going to handle it? And so do a couple of simple things, especially just a tip if you're going to use Zapier, PieSync, add in the integration of Slack or Microsoft Teams and send an alert, or build a work, if you could, you would need the API to build a workflow to send that through a workflow and yourself in HubSpot, but also monitor when it doesn't go where everybody likes to talk about when it goes right. Humans do weird things, and 6 months from now, somebody's going to do something that's going to break the integration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So, but in that glorious first 5 months before the integration is broken, let's talk about let's talk about how we actually do the whole migration process. So at first we talked about consolidating and importing data. We just mentioned about things like overwriting. So goodness gracious, if we can do some of that consolidation off HubSpot or utilize some of the built-in syncing tools, I think that's great. That's a really powerful way to make sure that we're not overwriting good data with bad data, is to definitely spend some quality time outside of HubSpot first, so that our import files are squeaky clean and we're bringing in really good information. More than once have I seen people bring in a bunch of data only to decide that we're going to start fresh again because they really weren't conscious about having good data structure at the outset and making sure that they were appropriately importing these files and troubleshooting the errors and so on and so forth with their data. Any other horror stories here, Todd, that we should think about? Or on the other hand, best practices when we're preparing our database to move and migrate into HubSpot?
Find the key. So find the key, in this case, HubSpot property, and another system is probably called a field. Find the key. And this, if it's company ID, find that unifying key that says, again, where people get messed up on importing data is the association. You got to make sure Ben, first name, Donahauer, last name, is with company No Bounds Digital. When you lose that association upon import, keep mapping that out. Ben, your screenshot's perfect. Doing more than one at a time is going to help that, because HubSpot, through their import tool, will flag it and say, like, hey, you've got to connect these. What are these? How am I going to connect these two? So the gotcha is almost always finding the key, use the import tool, not one at a time. At least do 2 if you can. You might start with contacts. That's an easy start. But the next thing you're going to do is get that company in there and or deal, depending if you're B2B or B2C. But that's it, man. The import tool is so great. Like, don't be scared of it. As Ben told you in the previous thing, there's a lot of people that do this on their own, but a partner can guide you here too. But the import tool is wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of the things to think about too is thinking about the overall timeline of the migration process as well. And that is useful with data and data imports because we might be actually doing multiple imports from your legacy system, maybe an initial import. And then as people move over, we're going to be doing a Delta import as well. So important to consider that along with your time frame just the same. So if you're going to have somebody working out of a legacy system until you finalize some things for a particular department inside of HubSpot, again, you might be doing 2 different migrations from the same tool, one from the beginning of time to that first migration, and then the second migration data from the first time that you imported to when you actually pull that trigger and now your team is 100% working out of HubSpot. Security. One of the areas that HubSpot really has made a lot of strides in the last couple of years, field level permissions, single sign-on, partitions. This is an area that has enterprise considering HubSpot where they weren't before. One of the interesting things that you told me about, Todd, while we were preparing for this webinar was around field level permissions and not being afraid to add users to the HubSpot platform. So I'd love to hear more about where your head's at there.
Yeah, so this is the horror story. I actually have a lot of good stories, but it's also fun to talk about what goes wrong. So horror story here is great company is going to go unnamed.
Sure.
They have this old ERP back office system, and they have HubSpot Enterprise. They have HubSpot Sales and Marketing. And what they were doing is because of their license structure with the ERP, they couldn't afford to buy licenses for all the sales reps. So the sales reps would call this one poor lady at corporate, and they would say, hey, let's call her Mary. Hey, Mary, it's me, Ben, and today I'm calling on Todd. Can you look up Integrate IQ and see if we've ever sold him anything? Because we started HubSpot on this day, and we have no records before that. So I have no idea. I can't see anything. And literally, Mary will take screenshots on her computer and send them out to the sales rep in the field. And so you don't have to worry about that in HubSpot. Like, don't be afraid to add users. You can block off features. You can block off field, property level permissions, and make this secure where people only see what you want them to see. But the beauty is, now this doesn't apply to like Sales Pro, right? And some of the Service Hub seats. But when marketing, like, you can control this and keep people in the buckets you want, but you also want them to have access to the data they need. You don't want them calling Mary.
Yeah, that is great from both an efficiency and an adoption perspective. Buy-in from executives. So when we think about having, an executive sponsor on their overall migration project, or a couple other people from the C-suite who want to feel like they're included in this process and are included in this process, but they might not necessarily be doing things day to day. Also really useful as well for managing your team as they change roles inside of your organization or leave your organization as well. So very, very useful tool there to bring on a lot of users and in a way that's thoughtful as well. I think that's one of the key value propositions of sales tools as well, too, is that you can bring people on at the enterprise level, and then you can bring people on who have lesser needs into lower tiers. So you're not necessarily locked in for all your users in that regard as well.
That's right.
All right. Creating reports. There was a lot of buzz about multi-touch attribution reports. And as somebody who's come from a marketing background as well, this is one of the tools that you might not have available in some of your existing reporting structure that is super valuable, especially for the marketing team, to see how different touch points are impacting revenue across multiple different assets that you have available digitally, multiple different assets that you see here in this screenshot example. Also, cross-object reports. This is something that you do have in Pro, but you just have higher levels. By cross-objects, Todd, you had alluded to objects earlier. These are things like contacts, companies, deals, tickets, those sorts of records. And on HubSpot Enterprise tools, you also get access to creating custom objects as well. So being able to build out custom object reports, and a number of them, is a nice differentiator with HubSpot Enterprise tools, maybe even compared to some of the tools that you're currently using. Building those out, really seeing the value of your marketing efforts, of your sales efforts, and what your service team is doing as well, all in one place. I also put calculated fields on here as well, because that's another thing where you get a lot more access to. And maybe this is just my own geekiness, but I love to get geeky with calculated fields and turn some of your property data points into actual numbers, going beyond lead scoring, maybe segmenting lead scores into a behavioral lead score and a demographic lead score, combining those sorts of things, taking a look at activities and then assigning those particular values. And then, of course, as we get to where the rubber meets the road, talking about revenue and so forth, calculated fields can be certainly super helpful there just the same. Todd, one of the little light bulbs that went off in my head in our pre-webinar discussions were using active lists to develop data points. And so I'm wondering if you can say that again for my own benefit and the benefit of people watching this webinar.
So I think a lot of people get tripped up and sometimes intimidated. Like, well, I'd like to use off-the-shelf dashboards. Cool. HubSpot has them in spades. HubSpot has a bazillion reports you can turnkey for marketing and sales today. So if you're a tinkerer like Ben and I, your little data nerd heart will be very happy because you can do all that. But for the rest of the world, which I don't unfortunately think Ben everybody's like us, the reality is, like, if you don't want to get into report building, if you don't want to learn cross-object, what you have is a dead simple report tool. And I tell people, before you even get to reports, just start creating a few active lists. So they have, under contacts and lists, in HubSpot, you have active and static. Static is a a point in time, show me some number, right? But they have one key feature, and that's the drill down function. So a lot of people in building reports and other systems, it's not as easy to drill down and say, okay, how many people meet this criteria? Most of the time, that's what we want in a report. How many people are contacts and have bought this and not this, and are not assigned to this sales rep or this territory, whatever those filters are. The list function is so simple in HubSpot that for those that are dipping their toe in the water, active lists are the way to go. And then it's going to say there are 168 of those, and it's going to update dynamically all the time. And you can click on it and drill down and see those 168 contacts. Other systems don't have this. They have robust, crazy reports. Ben, you'll remember in the old days of Crystal reports, or this, you'd have to have a full-time employee just to do this kind of work. Well, HubSpot really has given you a mini report tool. They call it lists, but I tell everybody, start there before, crawl before you walk model.
Yeah, that's great. What I love about that tip with using active lists as well is active lists or lists in general are the basis for so much else that you can do inside of HubSpot, whether that's enrollment criteria for workflows, whether that's your audience for email. So if you can use a list to meet your reporting requirements, you've sort of killed two birds with one stone there and set yourself up for email marketing success and marketing and sales automation success.
And alerts, right? The other thing that people want to know, like if it's a member, if someone is new member of this list, go build a workflow that says new member of list and what? Slack you, Microsoft Teams message, text you, email, assign a task. That's the cross-functional piece. Again, just starting you into something. I think, Ben, that's a great point, is that I think of it as a baby mini report that's hyper-functional and probably good for 90% of people's needs. But it's also an action, and it starts a trigger for action, right?
Yeah. At the same time, totally respect and understand that the reports and dashboards tool is certainly useful, especially when we want to add visuals to your data, especially when we want to report to the C-suite, directors of certain business units, that kind of thing. Really valuable there for people who might not be actively in HubSpot on a regular basis. We can still build out these reports to meet the key performance indicators that they're interested in seeing, have that automatically shipped out to them, and then we're rocking and rolling, saving a lot of your frontline team a lot of time and effort to produce those sorts of data for the people that need to see it.
Ben, I think you made a key point that we should make a little more note on. You can build your report and your dashboard and automate the email delivery of that to other people. So we have done this with customers to transform their business, where the exec team, who's used to, prior to HubSpot, have a monthly meeting to see some PowerPoint slide, now gets a weekly sales report, right? Weekly commission report. All those kind of things just get auto-generated and sent to their email. And that is a brand new way. It's not some login tool they got to go figure out how to, configure. They build a dashboard, they automate that. I think that is, sometimes as marketers and salespeople, we are thinking about like showing ROI. How do we show we're making a difference to the business? Put that in front of them, man. Let HubSpot do the work for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And as a real practical bread and butter thing, I recently did a report for a client, build it out, I don't know, 6 months ago, and the executive assistant to the CEO had requested this report. Turns out that she was literally spending 2 days a month, 2 days, putting this report together. And I said, well, just remember who put this report together when you're sipping martinis on the beach here. 2 extra days now.
That's right.
But it's useful, of course, to prove the value of what you're doing, of what the HubSpot platform's doing. And from a really practical perspective, if you have these sort of reporting requirements, now they're being taken care of automatically, or at least semi-automatically, if you need to add some insights beyond what data is there. So really think from a real practical perspective, huge time saver. Cool. Customizing our implementation. So I want to talk about some of our standard objects like contacts, companies, deals, and tickets. And just like we can customize who sees what properties inside of HubSpot, we can also customize the view that different teams have inside of HubSpot. So, of course, when we think about how can we consolidate sales and marketing in the same tool set, or sales, marketing, and service in the same tool set, when they've got so much, when there's things that are different about their workflows and what data they need to see when they're looking at a contact or looking at a company. But that can be addressed by customizing those records by team. I can show the sales team all the revenue stats, all the properties that are salient for them to be able to pick up the phone and call and see some of their past history there. Whereas, marketing might want to see things like their website activity and those sorts of stats as well. So we can customize those in a way that all of those records are meeting the needs of the different teams that will be living and working inside of HubSpot. And also, as an enterprise customer, we can do custom objects Todd, one of our most recent project that we're working on together is a textbook case for custom objects for HubSpot. We are creating a custom object that is properties. so let's think about this one. Properties as in physical real estate entities, not properties as in what would be synonymous with fields.
That's
and
right.
Building that out for a enterprise client. Going to have a lot of great use cases here for custom objects for enterprise, but at the same time, I would like to, how's this? Just like you should take a 3-step process with your integrations and first think, where's the native integration here? I think it's prudent to do the same thing with objects. And so before you go headlong into a custom object, even knowing that custom objects pretty much have the same functionality as any other standard objects, first think, is what I'm really talking about, is that really a company, or is that really a product, or is that really something that is within the standard objects functions? Any other, not necessarily cautions there or considerations that people should be thinking about in terms of a migration and when to choose custom objects over a standard objects, Todd?
I think I told somebody today when and we're migrating them over to HubSpot, and I showed them in a spreadsheet, like, these are all the fields that are native. These are all the fields that are going to be custom. I'll have to create this. You call it this thing that's esoteric to your business. But then I said, here are these 4. He had 4 different almost custom objects that could be custom objects. And I said, I need to educate you on what your options are. This could be just a company property, and it doesn't need to be its own object. Let me show you the difference. Why? If I can, for today, Ben, I still say the example, yes, the property project we're working on is like perfect. Like, it's a building, and a building is affiliated with a broker and a company, like a human contact, and that's perfect custom object. But a lot of times it may just be a custom deal property or a custom company property. If it can be native, I would just use that. But it's going back to what I've said a couple of times. It's like, what does this field need to associate with? We had to do one yesterday of, you can't associate a deal with a deal. So we made a custom object. Now that works for back orders. And so, yeah, man, I try native first always. But if it won't fit, the custom objects are a great option.
Yeah. I mean, the goal here with any migration and implementation is to keep it as simple as possible while still meeting your business goals. And it's, in fact, one of the reasons why you might be thinking about migrating in the first place is right. You have this monster of a system, and, unfortunately, we all need to take some personal responsibility that we created this monster. So we don't want to create another monster for you. We want to create something that is streamlined and as efficient as possible from the get-go, for sure.
Yep.
All right. Back into integrations, a couple other points here that we haven't necessarily talked about yet. So it'd be great if you could speak to them.
Sure. And for time's sake, I'm gonna try to be brief, and not always brief, as you can figure out by now. Number 1, map out the tools you have. You have Ghost apps. I promise you, if you haven't surveyed your team, try it. You'll be shocked. Next, the way I think about integration is, what do I want the output to be? And then work backwards. Like, well, I really would like to show ROI, and I'm going to show that in a report. Okay, ROI of what? Of products, by rep, by territory. If you start thinking about the report you want after the integration's there, it'll be easier for you to think about what fields need to be, or properties, synced over to HubSpot. Next, as we talked about before, is the depth. That's going to help you select your partner or your tool, right? Then things do go wrong. I like to say integrations is like 5 years ago, Ben, I bought a new car. I did not eat or drink in that car for maybe 4 months. There are now French fries, donut particles, right? Coffee spills. Over time, we treat software the same way. First couple of weeks, man, it is fun. New tool, we're building reports and active lists. Then we start getting willy-nilly. Let's just create our custom property. Let's create another dashboard. And it starts to get clunky and heavy. When you do that, you accidentally make mistakes sometimes that you forget, oh, this might affect the integration. So typically that's the way I look at getting yourself set up for success with an integration.
Good point. And common mistakes you had already mentioned about associating objects. It's about the connection. That was your Mandarin example here too.
Yes, yeah, that's good.
Thinking about training, that was something that we alluded to earlier. One of the things that's outstanding about HubSpot, and I'll mention this too back about custom properties, there is a training on HubSpot Academy to help you understand whether you should be using a standard object, whether you should be creating a custom property there, or whether you should go headlong into creating a new custom object. So something to check out in the HubSpot Academy, something in general, knowing that there's an outstanding resource there to onboard your team, make sure that they are enabled, understanding the platform, understanding what you're doing when you have bought into HubSpot Enterprise, understanding the frictionless sales thought process, understanding the inbound marketing methodology, et cetera, et cetera. But what's also key here is just to make sure that we're bringing in stakeholders, training as many people as we can. A point, Todd, that you've made is don't be afraid to get IT involved. Don't be afraid to add users to HubSpot. We can equip them and enable them with whatever their defined role might be as part of a training plan.
That's right.
So something else too that I would consider is just thinking about early training so that they can feel like they can hit the ground running. And when I say feel, part of it I do think is a psychological aspect. I always tell people, if you don't know what to do inside a HubSpot, click the big orange button. So, and I mean that because it's from a day-to-day perspective, I liken it to a game of chess. I can teach you how to play the game of chess in an afternoon. But then there's people like you and I, Todd, who have dedicated the better part of our working life here to understanding the nuance of HubSpot. So know that initially making sure that your team feels like they can go into HubSpot, that they're not going to break everything, is key, just the same as part of the training process. And as they get into it, they're going to understand how the system works, understand the logic behind it, and be able to move forward with success. Everything that we talked about here over the last 50 odd some minutes is consolidated into this checklist. So something that I would certainly encourage you to take advantage of, scan that QR code with your phone or jump into that link to do so. I will also be sending out an email after this webinar on my side of the house, and Todd might be doing something as well to make sure that people have access to it. And certainly you can contact us, reach out to us by logging onto visiting our websites here and contacting us just the same. I will also be following up with both Todd and my contact information if needed. Any other parting words from you here as we think about a key takeaway from this, or just words of wisdom as people are about to undertake a migration for their enterprise?
I would say, if you've done a migration in the past and you still have that scar tissue, I think we've all switched systems before and they've all not gone well. In part, what Ben said in the previous slide is critical. It's not launch and leave, right? It's launch, get settled. It's okay. You're not going to break anything. Let the debris settle. And once it's settled, get back with your partner that you hopefully found that get you onboarded correctly and trained correctly, and then go again. So we tell people, we're not going to leave you. We're going to migrate you or integrate you, and then we're going to come back in 30 days, and people are going to have a whole new set of questions, right? And so find a partner that can help you. It's not launch and leave. That's the critical mistake people have, is they say, I'm going to find the cheapest price I can to get my data moved over. And then guess what? It's your users, it's your team members that start to feel the pain, right? Because you set it up right today, but the business changes, and you're going to need to make sure you can get them on there. But like, don't worry about if you've had the scar tissue from the previous migrations. HubSpot Enterprise has all the things we've been telling you today that people don't even really appreciate how simple the interface is. Your team members will like the usability of it. I think it's just shocked people, especially if you're migrating from another enterprise marketing or sales tool.
Yeah, 100%. So Todd, of course, thank you so much for coming on to this webinar, co-hosting this with us. I think it's an important piece of content for the HubSpot ecosystem to talk more about the value that HubSpot brings to the enterprise. At some level, though, I think it's important to know that we've really just scratched the surface of what you can either do in terms of implementation or as part of the migration process. But I think that this webinar, I think that this checklist will get you started on the right foot and start moving you in the right direction as you go down this road. Of course, best of luck to you in that whole process. It's certainly going to be something that is going to be a valuable tool and platform for your business. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. We hope that you got as much value out of it as I think we did.